Now, let's talk about today's topic, the barriers or the challenge of intercultural communication. Mm, Intercultural communication, uh, it draws on ways we have learned to speak and give nonverbal messages. We do not always communicate the same way. Context, individual personality, and mood interact with the variety of cultural influences we have internalized that influence our choices. Communication is interactive, so an important influence on its effectiveness is our relationships with others. We have we have a lot of questions, uh, and that's, do they hear and understand what we are trying to say? Are they listening well? Are we listening well in response? Do their responses show that they understand the words and the meanings behind the words? We have chosen, we have chosen, and is it the mood positive and respective? Is there trust between them and us? Are there differences that relate to ineffective communication, divergent goals or interests, or fundamentally different ways of seeing the world? The answers to these questions will give us some clues about the effectiveness of our communication and the ease with which we may be able to move through conflict. Mm, The challenge is that even with all the goodwill in the world, miscommunication is likely to happen, especially when there are significant cultural differences between communicators. Miscommunication may lead to conflict or aggravate conflict that already exists. We make whether it is clear to us or not quite different meaning of the world, our places in it, and our relationships with others. Um, and According to Edward Hall's cultural factors, there are several categories. And first one is context culture, and time and space. And this is also divided several types: high context culture, low context culture, and monochronic time, polychronic time, and high territoriality and low territoriality. And high and low context cultures. First one is, let's introduce high context culture. In a high context culture, there are many contextual elements that helps people to understand the rules. As a result, much is taken for granted. This can be very confusing for a person who does not understand the unwritten rules of the culture. High context culture means that most of the information is either in the physical context or initialized in the person, while very little is in the coded, explicit, and transmitted part of the message. People expect from their interlocutor that he or she knows what the message of the communication was. They place great importance on ambience, decorum, the relative status of the participants in a communication, the manner of the message delivery, and this things is in law context culture. In a law context culture, very little is taken for granted. This means that more explanations needed. It also means there is less chance of misunderstandings, particularly when visitors are present. when dealing with different people from high and low context cultures, you always have to be aware of your interlocutors' cultural origin. This helps to avoid misunderstandings and creates a better forms basis for further discussion. And there is a lot, several factors about high and low context cultures. Uh, First, I'll talk about use of nonverbal communication in high context culture. Uh, People use much nonverbal communication in high context culture, and low context culture. People use more focus on verbal communication than body language. You And next type of uh, cultures, monochronic and polychronic. Let's talk about monochronic time. Monochronic culture means doing one things at a time. It assumes careful planning and scheduling and is a familiar Western approach that appears in disciplines such as time management. Monochronic people tend also to be low context culture. And polychronic time. In polychronic cultures, human interactions is valued over time and material things, leading to a lesser concern for getting things done. They do get done, but more in their own time. Polychronic people tend also to be high context culture. And there is also several factors um, about monochronic action and polychronic action. Uh, Actions, for example, people do one thing at a time. We, as far as I mentioned it before, people uh, in monochronic culture, people do one thing at a time, and polychronic action, people do many things at once. And another thing is monochronic action, priority. Priority in monochronic action is people put the job first, and polychronic action is a little bit contrast, because people put relationships first in monochronic action, polychronic action. Sorry, and the need for space. Some people need more space in all areas. People who encroach into that space are seen as a threat. Personal space is an example of a mobile form of territory, and people need less or greater distance between them and others. A Japanese person who needs less space, those will stand closer to an American, and inadvertently makes them American uncomfortable. Some people need bigger homes, bigger cars, bigger offices, and so on. This may be driven by cultural factors. For example, the space in America needs the greater use of space, whilst Japanese need less space, partly as a result of limited useful space in Japan. Uh, and another type of cultural barrier is high and low territoriality. High territoriality, some people are more territorial than others with greater concern for ownership. They seek to mark out the areas which are theirs and perhaps having boundaries wars with neighbors at a national level. Many wars have been fought over boundaries. Territoriality also extends to anything that is mine, and ownership concerns extend to material things. Security thus becomes a subject of great concern for people with a high need for ownership. People high territoriality tend also to be low context culture. And low context culture is people with lower territoriality have less ownership of space and boundaries are less important to them. They will share territorially and ownership with little thought. They also have less concern for material ownerships and their sense of stealing is less developed. People with low territoriality tend also to be high context culture. And examples of this affects versus natural culture. Affect or natural context describes how cultures express their emotions. Um, in effective cultures like in China, people express their emotions more naturally. Reactions are shown immediately verbally and or non-verbally by using mimic and gestures in form of body signals. They don't avoid physical contact, which is well known, especially from Italians and Spanish, when meeting each other very enthusiastic and with raised voices. Uh, and in natural cultures like Japanese tend to hide their emotions and don't show them in public. Neutral cultures don't express precisely and directly what they are really thinking, which can lead to misunderstanding as and certain emotions are considered to be important to exhibit in certain situations. And it is also considered as important not to let emotions influence objectivity and reason in decision making. In general, they feel discomfort with physical contact in public and communicate in a more subtle way with which makes it difficult for members of other cultures to read between the lines and get the message. T- today's topic's all about this, and today's lessons are is over. Thank you for your attention.